Good morning, Speaker, and it is an honour to rise today to participate in the debate on the government's throne speech on behalf of the people of my riding, Davenport. After a very lengthy summer recess, my constituents, I have to say, were surprised by the Premier's decision to extend that by an additional 3 weeks by proroguing the legislature. They were already questioning why we were thrown into an early federal election at a time when the pandemic was still very much and continues to be impacting our lives, our work and our economy. So the extended break that the government gave themselves just added to the sense that those in charge were out of touch with the realities facing everyday people. People like the parents who are worried about a rocky return to school with rising COVID cases, or the small business owners watching emergency supports expire with no replacement in sight, or the workers who've been asked to go back to riskier settings without adequate paid sick days, and the families of our seniors who are still facing the cruelty of a broken long-term care system that puts profit ahead of care. Those folks weren't looking for the government to take an extended break. They wanted their MPPs back in this place working for them. Now I know, we're all out there working in our constituencies and in our ridings, but there is business that needs to be dealt with in this legislature. And I think that the people of Ontario, seeing the MPPs take that extra time away from the legislature, were wondering why and who was going to see them through this fragile recovery phase and take real action to deliver help. People were also really frustrated, Speaker, that the government seemed to be operating without the checks and balances that define our system of government. Too often, governments get comfortable. We've seen this again and again, comfortable in their own power. They tend to see those checks and balances as a bit of a nuisance, Speaker. They start to dread answering questions in question period or appearing at committees. It's just a hassle for them. We saw what happened with the last government that got too comfortable in their own power, surrounded by insiders and losing touch with the people that they were meant to be working for. So with this in mind, I have to say I was looking forward to hearing the throne speech, expecting that at the very least the government would use this important tradition to outline a vision for our province in the months ahead and the next year. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I also hoped that against all odds it would mark a change of course for this province, because we desperately need one here in Ontario. Our healthcare heroes, the folks that the government members opposite refer to as heroes every day, our frontline healthcare heroes, are burning out. Hospitals and long-term care homes are understaffed more than ever. The wait for backlogged surgeries among my constituents and folks all across the province is long, and it is painful, and it is dangerous. Our kids' classrooms are jam-packed, leaving kids without one-on-one attention they need after such a truly difficult year and a half. And COVID cases are indeed rising in our schools. Small businesses are trying to rebuild and taking on new responsibilities without any extra resources, without any support from this government. Changing course would mean making significant investments in healthcare, in our schools, instead of making deeper cuts. It would mean standing up for local businesses over big box stores, and it would mean offering meaningful protection for workers, not simply prioritizing the needs of friends and insiders like this government has done repeatedly. And as we know now, sadly, Mr. Speaker, that throne speech did not outline a bold new direction for this government. It actually contained very little of substance. That was one lightweight throne speech, I gotta say, leaving a lot of Ontarians across this province, I think, like us, feeling abandoned and asking themselves, what was the point of that? I gotta say, the press was even less enthused, and I did want to share some of the headlines from going back a couple weeks now to the throne speech. The Waterloo Record, better luck next throne speech, Ontario. They went on to say that whoever wrote the speech took 2,325 words to say almost nothing. And they mentioned that the Premier had, and I quote, squandered the opportunity and in the process let down the people of this province. Indeed, the speech was more notable for what it didn't include. The day of the speech, there were outbreaks declared in 3 more schools here in Toronto. Cumulatively, there were 17 schools in the city that had outbreaks. Parents, students, education workers had already been back in in-person learning for weeks, and the COVID cases reported in schools were increasing to the point where nearly a third of all new infections in the province were related to schools. How seriously did this government take this threat? Well, not very seriously if you consider that the throne speech that was supposed to be an outline of their agenda and their priorities didn't mention schools once. I want to read a letter that I received from a mom in my riding. Her name is Laura. And I'm just going to read this whole thing out because I thought it was so well put together. She says, despite the availability of tests and vaccines, it seems that nothing has changed for the schools since March 2020. In 18 months, from the age of 3 to 4.5, our daughter has only spent 7 months in childcare or school. She has been deprived of contact with kids her age and a proper education. We had to work and care for her at the same time. Toddlers can't use a computer or be left alone for a minute. A lot of families are at wit's end and/or dire financial circumstances. The policies to protect children should take into account the essential role in-person schools have in their and their families' well-being. Maddie, a teacher from Davenport, wrote to the education minister, and she copied me, and here's something that she said. She said, my school currently has 4 primary classes, all above the cap of 20 at 25, 25, 26, and 24. 4 primary classes. We had a primary class cut at the beginning of the week, which increased our class totals by about 5 each. Our rooms are small. Our desks are 1.5 feet apart. Our windows are open about 12 inches from the bottom. During a regular year, this would be unimaginable, but this year, it is enraging and scary. Please come and help us, she said. Join us in our packed rooms. Join us for maskless lunches. Join us for the tears, the confidence crisis, the 6-year-old feelings of anxiety, fear, and doubt, the upset, scared parents, all of it that the Ministry of Education clearly has never experienced or thought about. Please do something, do better. Those are the words of Maddie, a teacher who wrote to me and to the Minister of Education speaker. These are just a few of the, and I'm going to really honestly, countless messages that I receive from my community, but from all over the province as the opposition education critic, I have to say. Speaker, school boards were scrambling to implement new vaccine disclosure rules and keep track of testing requirements. They continue to. They have been forced to combine and reorganize classes to meet ministry funding requirements, causing more disruption, more risk for our students. They need a commitment of more funding to keep class sizes low, and many of our school boards across this province have actually passed motions calling for just that. And as I raised in the House just yesterday, many boards are pleading with the government to take action to keep schools and students safe by making those vaccines mandatory, something the government has steadfastly refused to do, just as they've done in healthcare. Speaker, no unvaccinated staff should be working with vulnerable people in hospitals or in long-term care homes or in classrooms. This throne speech could have, should have, outlined a safe schools plan and immediate funding for smaller class sizes and the hiring of more teachers and more education workers for those kids who have been put so far behind, who've seen their learning disrupted for more weeks and more months than any other schools in this country and pretty much in North America and the world. But we didn't see a penny for that. We saw nothing. We didn't even see the mention of the word schools. The government couldn't even be bothered to give these issues a passing mention in a speech that is meant to outline their priorities. Well, that's a real shame, and it says a lot to the people of this province. Speaker, I want to talk about an issue that did garner a few words in the throne speech, and that's long-term care. And I want to say that this government in the throne speech reiterated some of the provinces that we've already heard from the government, while steadfastly refusing to take any responsibility, though, for the devastation and the death that we witnessed in long-term care during this pandemic. Those horrors aren't something that happened in the past. It was just months ago. And I mean, I have to say, it sometimes feels like an eternity, right? But Mr. Speaker, it was just months ago. Those lives were lost. Families across this province were devastated. And for some seniors, it persists. The throne speech celebrated a mandatory vaccination requirement in long-term care that, I got to say, came painfully late. A long-term care home in Toronto was under lockdown around this same time after an unvaccinated staff member brought COVID back into the home. Vaccination of residents helped a lot, but the impact of isolation and the fear of infection continue to impact residents and separates them from their loved ones. Government members didn't need to look to the throne speech for inspiration on long-term care, because that very day, on the lawn, family members, support workers, advocates were gathering to demand action and justice for our seniors. They were holding placards with images of their loved ones lost far too soon. They were very clear, Mr. Speaker, in their demands. They wanted accountability from the private for-profit care homes whose profits grew while residents suffered. They were calling on the government to act using legislation and powers that already exist to withhold licenses, to levy fines against those companies that have acted like the law just doesn't apply to them. And I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, it was an honor to join my NDP colleagues outside that day to hear from those folks. And many of them, I want to say, I have not met in person until that day. People who've been in touch with my office because of the pandemic, we couldn't see each other, and it was very moving to actually meet some of those family members in person. And their tireless advocacy was really a poignant contrast to the uninspired, narrow speech that we heard in the House that morning. And I wish that some of the members opposite could have had the courage to join us out there in front on the lawn that day. I really do. I was surprised they didn't, actually. Just, if nothing else, just to listen, to actually listen to those people and to use their power as government members to actually deliver for seniors. Minister, another missing key word in the speech, of the throne speech, which I was, or term, I guess, that I was really surprised was completely missing, was climate change. And I don't think I need to tell anybody here we're in a climate crisis. We urgently need the province to step up. This government has repeatedly shown its willingness to prioritize the demands of big developers over protecting the environment. We've seen it again and again. I want to say in my community, among the issues that people prioritize over everything else is climate change. And I think that's true with just about everybody in this province, pretty much, every corner. I mean, there's nothing that is a greater threat to humanity right now than climate change and the need for urgent climate action. And to have that missing from this throne speech so completely was, I mean, baffling, actually. I really can't understand it. We've seen how this government has used their powers to gut conservation authorities. We've seen how they've continued to ignore the Environmental Bill of Rights, and by the way, Environmental Bill of Rights introduced by an NDP government, something we're continue to be very proud of. The government's so-called Made in Ontario Environment Plan has promised a $400 million carbon trust, which has yet to be delivered or funded, and it's really just making an inadequate plan even more inadequate. It's just words. It's just words on paper right now, Mr. Speaker. We need to recognize that the climate crisis is a threat to our health, our economy, and our way of life. We need to bring that same whole-of-government approach that was justified for COVID-19 to bear on what is an existential threat. And this government just doesn't seem to get that. And I think this throne speech made that very clear, and it showed how far behind Ontarians, how far removed this government is from Ontarians. Whether you're talking about the folks who are out there on the lawn at Queen's Park after the throne speech, talking about what needs to happen in long-term care, how we get that profit out of long-term care, how we put people before profit. Whether you're talking about that or you're talking about, the kids that continue in various ways during the COVID pandemic to the young people who continue to try to raise their voices in Fridays for Future across this province, around the world. This government, these members don't listen. They don't even pretend to. They don't even go out there and just listen to those families. I mean, I would say, and I've only got a few minutes left here, Mr. Speaker, but I did want to say, I've been thinking a lot as we head into this, last few months, really, of our term. We're into an election in June 2022, and I've been reflecting a little bit on what I've learned as an MPP. Like, what were my lessons? So now I've been elected for a little over 3 years as a member of provincial parliament, and I try to think about what I've learned and positive things I can take from this experience. And I would say one of the things that I've learned and is the importance of listening. It's actually listening. I mean, there's action. You listen, and then you take action. Hopefully you take action. but there's also a piece of this just actually listening to people and understanding. And I think it's been one of the most valuable things that I've actually experiences of being an elected MPP is that opportunity to hear from people with lots of different experiences and learn so much. It's really a privilege, Speaker. It's an incredible privilege. And so, and it doesn't mean just listening to the people that agree with you. It means listening to the people that don't agree with you. That's absolutely crucial, in fact, if we're going to have a balanced approach to governing. And I unfortunately feel like that's been missing. I want to also mention a few other things where I think this government, the issues that we're missing quite considerably from this throne speech while I have a few more minutes. I was really astonished not to see real talk about economic recovery and real action to address, in particular, the loss of women from the workforce through the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for what some have called the she-covery. The fact that this government has not just, grabbed onto that offer by the federal government, something that New Democrats have fought for generations, of $10 a day childcare in this province that will transform life for so many people in our communities, and for so many women in particular. I meet women all the time on the doorsteps now, who gave up, who had to walk away from careers because, to take care of their children, single parents sometimes not, because there just isn't childcare. There wasn't childcare. There wasn't school. They had to stay at home and take care of them if they were in school. These women, this isn't just a loss for them personally. It's a loss for all of us. 100%. Our economy will not recover, and so it's more essential than ever in this moment. And it's just, by the way, the right thing to do. Other things that we're missing, any conversation about Indigenous and treaty relations, truth and reconciliation. The only new point of reference seems to be Ontario and Canada observed the inaugural National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Wow. No policy commitments. And by the way, let's just not forget that this is a government that has not moved on even making that National Day for Truth and Reconciliation a statutory holiday. I mean, not even that. Nothing. Nothing for rural Ontario. Rural Ontarians who continue to this day to be neglected without proper investments in infrastructure, in agriculture, in schools, in hospitals. Housing, Mr. Speaker. The Premier promised that nobody was going to be evicted who couldn't pay their rent due to the pandemic. But this government's has not continued that, and this government's main idea for housing has been to scrap environmental protections and use MZOs that seem to be more about helping their friends than making homes more affordable. Mr. Speaker, what was notable about this throne speech was what was missing. And there was a lot. And I think this government has truly failed in charting a plan and a path forward of recovery for this province, which they have an opportunity to do. And by gosh, I really hope that over the next few months they see some sense and they make some change, because the people of this province and in my riding of Davenport sure deserve that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.